wins, and it's just like, how do you win? Anyway, our next roulette shares some ancient words of love. Please welcome Susan Mack.
So I was probably in kindergarten when my girlfriends and I started talking about our little crushes. And I think I was about 7 when my great-grandmother came to visit and was probably the first person to ask me if I had a boyfriend. And I remember wanting to tell her about my secret crush on Brett Brodzinski, but as I tried to whisper it to her, she was kind of deaf, and she kept saying, I can't hear you, I can't hear you. And in order to actually tell her about my secret crush, that means my brothers would have had to hear, and then I would have been harassed for the rest of my life. So I didn't end up telling her. But this did set a pattern for this feeling from a very young age, like if I could just find that one person, it would fix all of my social woes. And boy, were my social woes many. And when I went through middle school, early high school, and my friends started having boyfriends and pairing up, it still seemed elusive. And the only person who it felt like really understood my woes was John Hughes. Because man, did I want to be Molly Ringwald down to the curly red hair and hats. And I wanted a character like Jake Ryan, except hopefully not a Jake Ryan that would give his girlfriend away to some nerdy guy so he could possibly date rape her. But like a cool Jack Ryan who was popular, who could like see and choose my nerdy, socially awkward self over the girls he was probably hanging out with at the keggers in the park or Heather Theoret's house that I never got invited to, and even if I had been, I probably wouldn't have showed up at. But I dreamed of this kind of person, and now it's 1987, and I'm in my sophomore year of high school, and I have a note from a boy. And you know, 1987, we didn't have social media, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have texting, we didn't even have email. So if we wanted to communicate with each other, we had to actually speak to each other or write notes. And now I have a note from a boy, but this boy, he's really not Jake Ryan. Neither him, that was Omar who'd written me this note, and Ben, my friend, who handed it to me saying, Omar asked me to give this to you. And neither Omar nor Ben, they were not Jake Ryan. They weren't even the cool, nerdy Anthony Michael Hall. These were the boys who played Dungeons and Dragons in the library during lunch, and Ben had told me that at one point he and Omar actually took the time to calculate the amount of potassium it would take to blow up the city's reservoir, although they didn't actually have the intentions of doing it. Now, had they been in high school 10 years later, maybe girls would have looked at them and said, potential tech billionaire, instead of revenge of the nerds. Clearly not somebody you were going to improve your social status by dating. And I, have always had a slight affinity towards nerds, but not necessarily to date these particular ones. And I remember in my freshman year, I actually talked to Omar a fair amount because he sat next to me in a programming class, and on the other side was Greg Turchik, who would harass anyone who was lower than him on the social totem pole, and he had made me cry on at least one occasion. So I tried not to talk to him, and I would turn to talk to Omar instead, who would tell me things like that he was writing his biology paper on spontaneous human combustion. And the fact that I laughed and thought that was worth talking about was definitely different from most of the girls in our high school, and probably meant that I exchanged more words with him in that semester than he had exchanged with any other girl in his entire life. Now Ben, on the other hand, who was handing me this note, I spent a lot of time with Ben that year because first of all, we took all of the same classes, but not necessarily at the same time, and there was overlap between his really nerdy friend group and my slightly less nerdy friend group, and so we'd often end up at the same lunch table. But he also was my partner in crime because we were the only 2 kids in our grade that went to our church. And our church kept a very, very strict Friday sunset to Saturday sunset Sabbath. And anything that looked like work, and since we were in high school, anything to do with high school would be considered work. That couldn't happen during those times. So that meant that all of the football games and dances and debate tournaments and choir concerts and stuff were sort of off limits because they happened on the Sabbath. So the social isolation that kind of would come from that, we shared that. And on top of that, to make up for all of those things, That was the year that his parents decided he needed to develop more social skills and forced him to participate in church youth group. So we started carpooling to youth group quite a lot. And we spent a lot of the time in the backseat of the car arguing with each other constantly about intellectual topics as we drove to different youth group events around all over southwestern Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. And some of our arguments would be about things like the fact that he believed that clothing should be optional in public, and I thought it should be required. So at school, I'd try to keep my distance a little bit from him because I needed my space, and he didn't always make this easy because sometimes he'd decide to do really nice things, like the time he decided that he wanted to give flowers to some of the girls who were his friends so that they could not be as stressed out about their midterms. So he shows up right before my last class of the day and hands me this long white box. And I take it into class, and he wasn't in that class, and I open it to find a dozen long-stemmed red roses. And I don't really want to have to explain this to anyone. And so when Larry Cho, who was cool and in a band, asked me who gave me the flowers, I did what any brave, upstanding, self-confident high school girl would do and lied and said, it was my secret admirer, I don't know. At which point he said, I don't believe you, and if you don't tell me, I'm going to tell everyone that some total nerd gave those to you. At which point I just said, and who will you say? And he said, Ben's name. At which point I blushed, and he realized, oh my God, he did give those to you? I promise I won't tell anyone. So now Ben has given me a note from Omar. And I don't know what's going to be in it. Is it something about spontaneous human combustion or something? And I open it, and I say these words, a merkin for your quinn. I don't know what this means. Ben doesn't know what it means. I'm not sure anyone knows what this means. So I take my note. Ben promises he'll find out for me. And I take my note into chemistry class. And my best friend Laura had happened to go to some gifted camp over the summer where they were studying word roots. For like 3 weeks, you have a bunch of overly smart kids in a room studying word roots. What are they going to do? They're going to find every dirty, sexual, body humor, arcane word that has ever existed, because that's what overly smart kids do. So she could translate this note for me. Oh. And it turns out in the Middle Ages, prostitutes wanting to avoid body lice would shave themselves from head to toe. And some of their clients didn't enjoy this. So they would wear a merkin, which was like a wig, but not on your head. They would wear a merkin on your quinn. So this boy had written me a note that said in Middle English, a wig for your vagina. And I'm 15 and religious. I don't know what to do with this. Jake Ryan doesn't do this. So Ben, my kind friend, investigates this for me, and he finds out that Omar has been watching John Hughes films too. And he has decided that he wants romance in his life. And that he wants to steal me from Ben. So the plot was that he would write this note, and the best I can figure is that he hoped that Ben would never give it to me, because Ben would read it and go, I can't hand that to her. And that Omar would find out that Ben had not given me this super secret note, or maybe just that Ben had like invaded my privacy by reading this super secret note, and that he would tell me, and I get really mad at Ben for being so possessive and invasive, which actually like was probably likely, because I was often mad at Ben for being so invasive in my space. And then he would sweep in and comfort me and be my knight in shining armor, and we would live happily ever after. Except that I wasn't dating Ben, and Ben didn't read the note, and I could find a translation of it. So instead, I really never talked to Omar again. And Ben avoided him for a while too. But not so long that we didn't find out that later in life, hopefully Omar's plotting skills improved, because he ended up working for the CIA. Oh. And Ben remains a very, very good friend of mine. I went to his wedding, and when he recently lived in Vegas, I was one of the first people he sent pictures to. And the best thing about this whole story is that it didn't turn me off from my love of nerds and nerdiness, because I married my husband who's an extreme nerd and I couldn't be happier.